Marcus did not raise his voice when he found her. That was what unsettled Aurora the most. Not anger. Not shouting. Not the cold detachment he usually weaponized when he wanted to punish someone without ever touching them. No. What unsettled her was the complete absence of performance when he stepped into the observatory and saw her standing there beside Elijah Mercer at 1:13 in the morning with the station lights dimmed low and the stars spread endlessly beyond the glass. Marcus just stopped walking. And looked at her. Really looked at her. Aurora felt it immediately, that shift in the air between three people carrying too much history into one room. Elijah stepped back first. Not dramatically. Just enough to make it clear he understood exactly what this moment was and exactly who it belonged to. Marcus's gaze flicked to him once. Then back to Aurora. "You missed briefing," Marcus said quietly. Aurora crossed her arms over her chest. "I wasn't aware attendance was mandatory at midnight. It is when half the outer grid is unstable." His voice stayed calm. That calmness irritated her instantly, because she knew Marcus well enough now to understand what it meant when he became this controlled. It meant emotion had already gone too deep beneath the surface to be trusted anywhere near the light. Elijah cleared his throat softly. "I should go." Marcus didn't answer him. Aurora did. "You don't have to." Elijah looked between them for one long second, intelligent enough to recognize the impossible position she had just placed him in. Marcus finally spoke. "Actually," he said, still looking only at Aurora, "he probably should." There it was. Not jealousy exactly. Something sharper. Possession wrapped carefully inside restraint. Aurora felt heat rise immediately into her chest. Elijah exhaled once through his nose. "I'll see you tomorrow, Rory." Marcus's eyes shifted at the nickname. Tiny movement. Almost invisible. But Aurora caught it. Of course she did. Elijah left quietly, the observatory door sliding shut behind him with a soft hydraulic whisper that left the room suddenly, overwhelmingly silent. Aurora turned toward the stars instead of toward Marcus. "You could have handled that better." "I handled it very well considering the circumstances." She laughed once under her breath. Dangerous sound. And what circumstances are those exactly? Marcus walked farther into the observatory slowly, hands clasped behind his back the way he always stood when he was trying to maintain control over something volatile. Usually negotiations. Sometimes war. Lately, her. "You disappearing for 3 hours during an active systems crisis," he said evenly. "With Mercer. I was helping him recalibrate the telescope array. You were avoiding me." That landed because it was true. Aurora hated that he said true things so directly sometimes. Hated that he stripped excuses down to bone with almost surgical precision. She finally turned toward him fully. "And if I was?" Marcus held her gaze. The stars reflected faintly in his eyes, softening a face that had spent most of its life learning how not to soften for anyone. "Then I would ask why." The honesty in that answer caught her off guard, because she had expected accusation. Instead he sounded tired. Aurora looked away first. That irritated her too. "You know why," she said quietly. For a moment neither of them moved. The station hummed softly around them. Low mechanical life beneath steel floors and reinforced glass and 1,000 systems keeping everyone alive in the dark between worlds. Marcus took another step closer. Not enough to touch her. Enough to matter. "I know you're angry." "I'm beyond angry." "I know. You don't get to say that like it fixes something." "I'm not trying to fix it with words." Aurora looked at him sharply then. "Really? Because historically that's been your favorite strategy." Something moved across his face. Not anger. Impact. Good. She wanted him impacted. Wanted him unsettled the way she had been unsettled for weeks now. Ever since finding out the truth about the council deal. Ever since discovering Marcus had negotiated away part of the station's autonomy behind closed doors while telling her he was protecting everyone. Protecting her. The betrayal still sat jagged beneath her ribs because the worst part wasn't the lie itself. It was that part of her still understood why he had done it. Marcus rested one hand against the edge of the navigation table beside her. Close now. Too close. You think I don't know I handled this badly? Aurora's jaw tightened. I think you make decisions for everyone and then expect forgiveness afterward because your intentions were good. My intentions were necessary. There. She pointed at him instantly. That right there is exactly the problem. Marcus went still. Aurora could feel months of restrained emotion pressing at the edges of both of them now. The kind that eventually became dangerous if nobody said the hard thing first. You don't trust anyone else to carry weight with you, she said. You decide what everyone can survive. You decide what truth people deserve. You decide who gets protected and who gets sacrificed, and you call it leadership. His eyes darkened slightly. And you think I enjoy that? I think you don't know how to be anything else. That hit. She saw it hit. Marcus looked away briefly toward the stars beyond the observatory glass, and suddenly he looked older than he normally allowed himself to appear. Not physically, just exhausted in some deep internal way. When this station was failing 3 years ago, he said quietly, everyone wanted certainty from me. Answers. Direction. And every time I showed hesitation, people died. Aurora swallowed. Because there it was. The real thing underneath everything else. Fear. Not for himself. For everyone depending on him. Marcus finally looked back at her. So yes, he said softly. I learned to carry things alone because every time I didn't, someone paid for it. The anger inside her shifted uncomfortably. Not disappearing. Just becoming more complicated. She hated when he did this accidentally. When he stopped sounding like Commander Marcus Vale and started sounding like the man underneath him. The one she was already far too attached to. Aurora folded her arms tighter. You still should have told me. Yes. The immediate agreement startled her. Marcus stepped closer again. Now only inches separated them. I should have told you, he repeated quietly. I knew that while I was doing it. And I did it anyway because I was afraid if you knew the full situation you'd try to stop me. I would have. I know. Their voices had both gone softer now. More dangerous that way. Aurora looked at him standing there beneath dim observatory lights in his black uniform with fatigue carved faintly beneath his eyes and something painfully sincere sitting exposed in his expression. No defenses. No command mask. Just Marcus. And that was unfortunately the version of him she had the hardest time resisting. You don't get to keep hurting me just because your reasons make sense, she whispered. Something in his face broke slightly at that. Tiny fracture. But real. I know, he said again. The silence stretched. Heavy. Charged. Aurora became suddenly aware of how close he was standing. Of the warmth radiating faintly from him. Of the fact that Marcus only invaded personal space when emotion had already overridden discipline. His gaze dropped briefly to her mouth before returning to her eyes. Small movement. Devastating one. Aurora's pulse betrayed her immediately. Marcus noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything about her. That was half the problem. Aurora, he said quietly. Warning. Request. Confession. All somehow folded into 2 syllables. She should step back. Instead she asked the worst possible question. Did it bother you? Marcus's brows pulled together slightly. Mercer. There it was again. That dangerous stillness. Yes. No hesitation. No pretending otherwise. Aurora's breath caught softly. You don't get jealous. I do with you. The honesty of that nearly knocked the air out of her. Marcus seemed almost frustrated with himself for admitting it, but he didn't take it back. I don't particularly enjoy watching another man look at you like you're the center of his atmosphere. Aurora stared at him. And against all logic, despite the unresolved anger and the betrayal and the weeks of emotional whiplash, warmth moved traitorously through her chest. Because Marcus did not say things lightly. Ever. Every word from him cost something. You have absolutely no right, she whispered. I know that too. God. She hated him a little for making accountability sound attractive. Aurora turned away abruptly, moving toward the massive observatory window before she did something reckless. The stars stretched endlessly outside. Cold, beautiful, infinite. She heard Marcus move behind her slowly. Not cornering, never forcing, just following carefully like he understood she was balancing on the edge of something fragile. I meant what I said before, he said quietly behind her. About you. Aurora closed her eyes briefly. Marcus. No. Let me finish this time. She stayed still. He came to stand beside her at the glass, shoulder almost touching hers. I have spent most of my life being very good at surviving, he said softly. At strategy. At command. At making impossible decisions and living with them afterward. He paused. And then you arrived here and suddenly surviving stopped feeling sufficient. Aurora's chest tightened painfully. I don't know how to do this perfectly, he admitted. I don't know how to be responsible for thousands of lives and also be whatever it is you deserve from me every day. But I am trying, Rory. Rory. Not Commander Bennett. Not Aurora. Rory. The name landed gently between her ribs and stayed there. She looked at him then. Really looked at him. At the exhaustion. The restraint. The terrifying sincerity. And beneath all of it, the unmistakable fear that he might already be too late. That softened something inside her against her will. Just enough to become dangerous. Marcus watched her carefully, like he could feel the exact second her anger shifted shape. His hand moved slightly against the glass beside hers. Not touching. Waiting. Always giving her the final choice even when it clearly cost him. Aurora stared at that hand for one long heartbeat. Then another. Then she moved hers the smallest distance across the glass until her fingers touched his. Marcus inhaled sharply. Barely audible. But she heard it. The contact was light. Almost nothing. And somehow unbearably intimate. Neither of them spoke. The stars drifted silently beyond the observatory windows while their hands rested together against reinforced glass in the middle of a station suspended at the edge of known space. Marcus turned his hand slowly beneath hers until their fingers fully intertwined. Aurora felt her heartbeat stumble. His thumb brushed once against her knuckles. Gentle. Tentative. Like this mattered enough to be careful with. It did. That was the problem. Everything between them mattered too much now. Aurora looked down at their hands. Then up at him. You hurt me, she said quietly. Marcus nodded immediately. I know. And I'm still angry. You should be. And part of me still doesn't trust you. Pain flickered across his expression at that. He accepted it anyway. I'll earn it back. Not defensive. Not demanding. Certain. Aurora searched his face for manipulation and found none. Only truth. Raw and difficult and completely unprotected. It terrified her a little how much she wanted to believe him. Marcus lifted their joined hands slowly and pressed the faintest kiss against her knuckles. Aurora stopped breathing. The gesture was devastatingly restrained. No performance. No seduction. Just tenderness. Real tenderness from a man who usually held himself together with military precision and iron control. When he lowered her hand again, his forehead rested briefly against hers. Aurora closed her eyes instinctively. And suddenly the observatory felt too small for all the emotion trapped inside it. I missed you, Marcus admitted softly. Not dramatic. Not polished. Just true. Aurora felt the confession move through her chest with frightening force because the worst part was, she had missed him too. Even while angry. Even while hurt. Even while trying desperately to protect herself from exactly this. Her fingers tightened unconsciously around his. Marcus exhaled slowly like he felt it all the way through him. We're still a mess, she whispered. A faint smile touched his mouth. Catastrophically. That almost made her laugh. Almost. Instead she opened her eyes and looked at him standing impossibly close beneath starlight and dimmed station lamps, his composure hanging by threads only she ever seemed capable of loosening. Marcus. If you lie to me again like that. I know. No. Her voice softened dangerously. I don't think you do. His expression turned serious immediately. Aurora held his gaze. If you do it again, I won't survive it a second time. The truth of that settled heavily between them. Marcus looked at her like she had handed him something unbearably fragile. Then very carefully, very slowly, he touched his forehead to hers again. I heard you, he whispered. And Aurora stood there in the observatory with the stars burning endlessly around them and the most impossible man she had ever known holding her hand like it was something sacred, and realized the deeper emotional clash between them had never really been about betrayal alone. It was about two people who loved each other fiercely enough to wound each other by accident. Two people trying to learn whether love could survive responsibility, whether vulnerability could survive leadership, whether two stubborn, damaged hearts could choose honesty before fear ruined them both. And standing there with Marcus breathing softly against her forehead, Aurora realized something even more terrifying. She still wanted to try. Aurora did not sleep after the observatory. She tried. God, she tried. She lay in her quarters staring at the ceiling while the station lights dimmed gradually into artificial night cycle, one hand resting across her stomach, the other curled against the blanket beside her where cold space remained cold space because Marcus Vale was not there. And that was the problem. He was nowhere near her, and somehow he was everywhere anyway. In her head. In her bloodstream. In the memory of his forehead resting against hers beneath the stars like she was something precious enough to approach carefully. Aurora turned onto her side sharply. Annoyed with herself. Annoyed with him. Annoyed with the fact that after everything, the lies, the decisions made behind her back, the unbearable weight of loving a man who always believed responsibility came before his own happiness, one soft kiss against her knuckles had nearly undone her completely. That was unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. Which was exactly why she found herself standing outside Marcus's office at 6:12 the next morning holding two coffees she absolutely did not intend to bring him. She stared at the door. Then at the coffee. Then back at the door. This is humiliating, she muttered under her breath. You could still leave. Aurora nearly jumped. Elijah Mercer leaned against the opposite wall holding a data tablet in one hand, and looking far too entertained for this hour of the morning. She narrowed her eyes immediately. How long have you been standing there? Long enough to watch you argue with caffeine and unresolved feelings. She sighed deeply. I hate perceptive people. You specifically hate perceptive men. That too. Elijah's expression softened slightly as he looked at her. You okay? The gentleness in the question almost caught her off guard. Almost. Aurora shifted the coffee cups between her hands. No, she admitted quietly. Not particularly. Elijah nodded once like he appreciated the honesty. Then, because he was unfortunately a good person despite how inconvenient that was becoming, he crossed the hallway and gently took one of the coffees from her hand. This one his. Aurora frowned. You're stealing my coffee. I'm saving your dignity. Elijah glanced toward Marcus's office door. You walk in there carrying two cups after whatever happened between you two last night, and the commander is going to look at you like he's watching the sunrise over Earth. Aurora blinked. That was disgustingly specific. I notice things. Yes, apparently everyone on this station notices things except the people actually involved. Elijah smiled faintly, but it didn't fully reach his eyes this time. And Aurora saw it. Of course she did. There had always been something quietly restrained about Elijah's feelings toward her. Not pushy. Not manipulative. Just present in a way he never forced her to acknowledge. Now, standing across from her in the pale corridor lighting, he looked at her carefully for a long moment before speaking again. You love him. Not a question. Aurora's throat tightened instantly. She looked away. I don't know what I'm doing. That wasn't my statement. She laughed softly under her breath. Painfully. No, she admitted. I think I probably do. Elijah absorbed that quietly. And for one brief moment, she saw disappointment move across his face so quickly most people would have missed it entirely. But Aurora had spent her life reading micro-expressions and fractured silences. She saw it. Eli. It's okay. No, it's not. Another faint smile. Sad this time. Rory, he said gently. I knew before you did. God. Why did everyone around her insist on being emotionally intelligent at the worst possible moments? Aurora looked at him helplessly. You deserve someone uncomplicated. Elijah actually laughed at that. You're saying that to a man who chose astrophysics as a career. That startled a real smile out of her despite herself. There she is, he murmured softly. Aurora's chest tightened unexpectedly. Because Elijah deserved easy. And she was beginning to understand with terrifying clarity that loving Marcus Vale would never be easy. Not ever. The office door slid open suddenly before either of them could say anything else. Marcus stepped out mid-sentence while reviewing something on a holographic display. Then he looked up. Stopped. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. Aurora stood there with one coffee missing from the carrier, and Elijah standing too close beside her, and Marcus's gaze moved between them with calm precision that somehow felt far more dangerous than anger would have. Commander, Elijah said evenly. Mercer. Aurora internally cursed both of them for sounding so composed. Marcus's eyes landed briefly on the remaining coffee in her hand. Then on her face. Something warm flickered behind his expression before discipline covered it again almost instantly. Can I speak with you? He asked her quietly. Elijah stepped back immediately. Briefing room in 20, he said to Marcus before walking away down the corridor without another word. Aurora watched him go feeling unexpectedly guilty. Marcus noticed that too. Of course he did. You care about him. She looked back at Marcus sharply. That's not a crime. No, his voice stayed calm. It isn't. But there it was again. That restrained jealousy he carried so tightly it almost became elegance. Aurora exhaled slowly. You don't get to look territorial right now. Marcus held her gaze. I'm trying very hard not to. The honesty of it hit harder than she expected. Aurora pushed past him into his office before her heartbeat could betray her further. Marcus followed a second later. The doors closed behind them. And suddenly the room felt much smaller than it actually was. His office always carried traces of him everywhere. Dark polished surfaces, clean architectural lines, faint amber lighting, the scent of expensive whiskey and cedar, and the quiet orderliness of a man who controlled chaos for a living. Aurora set the coffee on his desk. Marcus looked at it. Then at her. Oat milk, he said softly. Her stomach flipped traitorously. Don't make a thing out of remembering your coffee order. I wasn't aware I was smiling. You are. That seemed to surprise him slightly. Just enough that the smile actually deepened for half a second before disappearing again. Aurora hated how devastatingly attractive that was. Marcus moved closer slowly. Carefully. Like approaching something easily startled. You didn't sleep. Neither did you, she almost said. Because the exhaustion beneath his eyes was impossible to miss this morning. Instead, she crossed her arms. You lied to me. There. Back to the center of it. Marcus nodded once immediately. Yes. You manipulated the council negotiations. Yes. You decided what risks I could handle without asking me. Yes. Each answer came without hesitation. No defense. No excuses. And somehow that made it harder to stay angry in the clean, uncomplicated way she wanted. Aurora looked away toward the massive station window behind his desk. You know what the worst part is? Marcus stayed quiet. The worst part is that I understand why you did it. Her voice cracked slightly despite herself. And I hate that I understand because it makes me feel complicit in my own hurt. Something shifted sharply in Marcus's expression then. Real pain. He moved closer instinctively before stopping himself halfway. Aurora. No, she shook her head quickly. Do you know how exhausting it is loving someone whose reasons are always noble? There's never anywhere clean to put the anger because part of me always sees your side too. Marcus stared at her. And suddenly all the command composure fell away completely. I never wanted loving me to feel exhausting. The quiet devastation in his voice hit her straight in the chest. Aurora blinked rapidly. Damn him. Damn him for sounding human instead of untouchable. Marcus stepped closer again. This time he didn't stop. Aurora, look at me. She did. And immediately regretted it because he looked wrecked in that controlled Marcus Vale kind of way where the emotion only became visible in his eyes and nowhere else. Which somehow made it more intimate. More dangerous. I know I hurt you, he said quietly. But you need to understand something too. Aurora swallowed. When it comes to you. He paused like the words themselves cost something. I stop thinking clearly. Her breath caught softly. Marcus laughed once under his breath. Not amused. Frustrated with himself. I negotiate wars better than I negotiate my feelings for you. That almost broke her composure completely. Almost. You're impossible. I'm aware. You make me insane. A faint warmth touched his eyes then. Also aware. Aurora pressed a hand briefly against her forehead. This isn't funny. No, Marcus said softly. It really isn't. The tenderness in his voice changed the entire atmosphere of the room instantly. Aurora felt it happen between them. That dangerous softening. The thing that always arrived right before she forgot why she was trying to protect herself from him in the first place. Marcus reached out then slowly enough that she could have stepped away if she wanted. She didn't. His fingers brushed lightly against her wrist. Nothing more. But the contact sent warmth all the way up her arm. You matter to me in ways that have compromised every instinct I normally trust, he admitted quietly. That isn't your burden to carry. It's mine. But it's the truth. Aurora looked down briefly at his hand against her skin. Then back up at him. You scare me sometimes. Marcus went completely still. Not offended. Wounded. Because of what I am. No, her voice softened. Because of what you could become if you lost yourself trying to protect everyone. The silence after that stretched painfully between them. Marcus's thumb moved once against her wrist unconsciously. And Aurora realized with sudden clarity that nobody had probably ever said that to him before. Nobody had worried about him more than what he could provide. Something in his face changed slowly. Opened slightly. You're the only person who's ever looked at me and seen a man instead of a commander. God, that one nearly destroyed her. Aurora's eyes closed briefly. Marcus. His hand slid carefully from her wrist to her palm. Warm. Steady. She let him intertwine their fingers. Another terrible decision. Another one she couldn't seem to stop making where he was concerned. Marcus lifted their joined hands slowly and rested them against his chest directly over his heartbeat. Aurora froze. Because suddenly she could feel it. Fast. Far too fast for Marcus Vale. His gaze never left hers. You do this to me, he said quietly. The vulnerability of that confession stripped something open inside her. This powerful, impossible man standing in front of her letting her feel the exact evidence of what she did to him. No armor. No command. Just truth. Aurora's free hand lifted before she could stop herself. Her fingers brushed lightly against the sharp line of his jaw. Marcus inhaled sharply. And just like that the entire room changed. The air thickened. Shifted. His eyes darkened immediately at her touch, but he didn't move closer. Didn't assume.